Yes.
Good evening, everyone. It is 7 o'clock and it's time for our study session for Monday, June 10th. We have on our agenda for tonight, issues of discussion. We have first up, Living Access Support Alliance LASA on Gravity Lake Drive Common Projects Memorandum. So we calls on the Gum.
Good evening, Deputy Acting Mayor and members of the council. As you mentioned tonight, we're meeting to discuss on this topic, which would be Living Access Support Alliance construction of 25 units of affordable housing at Gravity Lake's Common Project. We brought this to council on April 10th at a study session. Council had some questions and we were looking to follow up on those questions.
Very good.
Next to me is the new executive director for LASA, Jason Scales. Brought him along so he can introduce and answer your questions, hopefully.
Thank you. Mhm. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Ask for some financial information, and I'd like you to confirm what I have been informed or researched. LASA's 2019 federal income filing 990 was filed in March of 2021 and is the last income tax return that the entity has filed. Is that correct?
So, thank you. I think there's a 2021 that I will get you.
There's the IRS doesn't list the 2020 filing or the 2021 filing on its website.
I'll look. But my understanding is there is a 2021. But I will double check that and get that information to you.
You know that if you miss 3 consecutive filings, you automatically lose your 501c3 status.
Yeah, it is. It is my number one priority to get those done. We are on, like many things during the pandemic. I don't want to describe this. It is harder to get services in a lot of ways. We are on a list right now for mid-August to have the auditor come in and do that. I am talking to 2 other organizations, companies to speed that up as well.
So if the agency isn't that complicated, if you have the ledger, it seems like and I've been the chair of a number of nonprofits, one of which has 25 stores. You hand the ledgers over to, and the bank accounts over to the CPA, and they do the tax return. So my question really is, if you haven't got the accounting done for years, how are we confident that you can run a project, execute a project that's this large, or that the numbers that we see for budget have any semblance to reality?
Well, I think the confidence thing is simple. We've run some projects not as large, right, but on a smaller scale that we've been successful at. For example, we just in April completed being in charge of rental assistance, which was $4 and $5 million a year over the last couple, each year over the last couple of years. I think it was a total of a little over $7 million over about 2.5 years that we did successfully. Went through a number of audits on that successfully. And, every other thing for other programs that we run, we also have audits done both financially and programmatically on how we do through the county and other major funders. And we've been successful in those as well, where we've come back clean on things. Like I said, is that, I've been at LASA for about 2.5 months now. And so this has been one of my priorities to get done. It's one of the things I'm focused on. Like I said, we have a tentative schedule date as long as everything goes smooth to get those processed. We also are looking at other ways to make that move along quicker. And I can't speak to why decisions were made, in 2020 or 2021. But now we do have a history of, again, having millions of dollars run through the agency annually, successfully getting that money out to individuals and landlords appropriately in a way that the funders and governments were very happy with.
So a couple other questions. Initially, we helped fund a LASA project for transitional housing. And without knowing any notice to the city, somehow that morphed into permanent supportive housing, which has a different objective. How did that happen?
I don't know how that happened. We're talking 2014, 2015 is my understanding of when that happened in the Prairie Oaks project.
Yeah.
I wasn't there for that. I will say that, again, one of the reasons as we talk about this Gravelly Lake Commons project, the way we've gone about funding is so that we have total control over the process as an organization for LASA, and that we don't have to bring in other partners that may take some of that control, own some of that control as well. This project would be 100% LASA on its own. And that way, again, we have control about who's there, who stays there, how the project works, the target population that we're looking for, all those kinds of things.
So in looking at the projected costs for this 15-unit addition and adding in the land costs, it appears that it's costs over $500,000 a unit. Is that correct?
I don't know how the land cost figure is into it again, because that was a long time ago, but it's 25 units. So at about $10.5 million.
What has LASA, to what extent has LASA participated in the management of the units that it currently runs, owns, has an interest in?
So are we talking about the Prairie Oaks 15
Yes.
units that are attached to us? Okay. So my understanding, again, we're talking 8-9 years ago, is that was a partnership between 3 organizations, Tacoma Housing Authority and LASA and Pierce County Housing Authority. How that relationship works now is pretty simple. Tacoma Housing Authority owns those units. They have a property management company that runs those units for them, that my understanding is runs a number of properties for Tacoma Housing Authority. It's not just this one. We have an agreement with the Housing Authority and some funding through Pierce County to provide services to the residents of those units. And the services are, let's help you build a life and a foundation so that you can move out of these units into your own unit down the line. That is what we do. It may be as simple as getting your driver's license, getting some documentation, finding employment, coming up with a financial plan, those kinds of things to get residents stabilized and ready to go out on their own. That is our responsibility. So we do not own the property. We do not own the units. We do not property manage those units. We do provide service to residents of those units. That is not a requirement to be in those units. So not everybody, for example, has to access those services and resources that we provide. Most do, but not all do. Some do for a year and then decide they don't want that assistance anymore.
What's the annual turnover rate of tenants?
It's a little tough to say because of COVID, right? There was the eviction moratorium for a long time. And so it's a little tough to say. We're, 15 units, we're going to have in about a 3-month span. I think we're going to have 5 people move out, either by they've done the work to go get their own unit, or they have not followed the rules and obligations that they signed up for. And so they're going to be evicted. That's,
How many
That's-
fall into each category?
I think it's right now it's 2 have successfully navigated the process and moving on, and 3 who have been evicted.
So what you've kind of described as a voluntary transitional housing project that's now officially a permanent supportive housing project.
Yeah. I mean, it's the way it was funded, again, a long time ago. I can't speak to how that decision was made and all that. What I know is now is that is our goal, right? Is to move people forward by increasing their income, increasing their skills, and them moving on to their own unit. It is subsidized by Pierce County Housing Authority. Those units are subsidized by Pierce County Housing Authority as well.
Is that choice vouchers or a different product?
It is permanent supportive vouchers, so they have to be have some sort of documented disability, that household.
So the management of the units associated with LASA has to this point been handled by third parties.
Well, in those permanent support, in those 15 units, we also own 24 other units. Mainly duplexes and 1 17-unit complex in the city of Tacoma that we property manage ourselves.
So there was a shooting incident at Prairie Oaks, and news reports indicated that the person who was charged had been seen with a firearm on the premises previously. Why wasn't any action taken?
I can't speak to that because again, our role in that is that we provide services to the residents there. If a resident feels like there's an issue and they report it to us, right? We report that to the property management company and the housing authority. We meet every month to have these discussions, and there's emails that go back and forth all the time on that. That's at this point not our decision to make, or we don't necessarily see behind the scenes on why decisions were made, or if we gave, hey, we heard this is happening, we heard that is happening. We're more of an informational provider, not a decision maker.
In that particular instance, did LASA have any personnel associated with LASA have knowledge that a resident had a firearm? And if so, did they report it to anybody?
My understanding is yes.
To both questions?
Well, there was a suspicious, my understanding is that, again, it happened before I was there. My understanding was that they reported that somebody said that there was something like that there, and we reported it.
To, who it was reported to?
My understanding is the property management company.
What is LASA's current interest in Prairie Oaks?
Well, 1, it's connected to our main office, right? 2, the way it was funded and the way it was built is that after 10 years, the ownership of those 15 units would come to LASA. So in 2025, those units will come under our ownership and management.
I don't recall that being the council being informed of that to begin with. We were lending money or granting money to LASA.
Again, I can't speak to that.
So
And
maybe you have a better recollection, Mr. Gunn.
yeah, I mean, we did, the project is LASA's project. I mean, LASA owns the building. So the funding went to LASA to build 15 units because the project is LASA's. In essence, LASA and THA have an agreement to run the 15 units. So there's a services agreement that goes along with it for LASA to provide services to those tenants. There's also an operations agreement that goes along with it, and there's just the ownership of the building itself. So we provided the money as part of the ownership agreement. Pierce County did as well. And then typically those agreements happen after the fact.
Thank you. And I realize it wasn't on your watch.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair question, so.
And the other question that was how did the funding kind of change? It almost realistically did change kind of on a dime overnight. So in 2013, I think is when we started looking at this project to fund it. At that point in time, there was funding for transitional housing, there was funding for shelters, there was funding for a lot of different projects. HUD started moving to this new road to end homelessness, and they changed everything in the 2014 to 2015 timeframe to supporting permanent supportive housing. It was housing first. I was never in support of those programs, still not the greatest fan of those programs. There's still a need for transitional housing. So at the same time that we kind of coalesced all of this funding, it kind of changed, and most of the funding that was put in there came through Pierce County housing, Pierce County continuum of care. So the county had the majority of the funding, so their rules kind of prevailed is what ultimately took place.
Yeah, I think I'm the same wavelength as you. And housing first has been a remarkable failure. One last question. What is the cost per unit all in on the additional units that you're proposing?
I'm gonna have to, hold on, I gotta do the math.
Itemized by, and if you have it, itemized by construction costs, soft costs, and land costs.
So it's 42,000. You have 420,000, excuse me, yeah.
And that includes what?
That's the total.
Including land?
I honestly, right now, do not know how much the lands.
The budget I saw didn't include land.
Yeah, because we own it outright, so everything we've done since then, asking for money hasn't included that because we've already owned that
So it's,
property.
you know, Mr. Gum,
I know the land cost. The land cost was $600,000. So all in with their budget, it would be about $436,000 per unit,
said 420.
including land.
Well, he said 420.
That I didn't have the land costs.
Yeah, his was without land.
And
So
so how,
land was $600,000 to acquire. They purchased it about a year and a half ago.
yeah, and that, how many units go on that?
How many units are on the land
Well, on
now?
the $600,000 worth of land?
There's-
Is that all being used for this project? And how many units is that on that new $600,000 piece? Because I know there's more than one parcel.
Yeah, depending on where they build, it could be on all of that parcel. I'm not certain if that's the front parcel, which would be on the Gravelly Lake side. So depending on if the construction's on the back, I mean, it's hard to tell. My estimate would probably be, you'd be looking at probably half of it realistically for this 25 units, and then half would be for the next development.
Thank you.
Mr. Branstetter?
Yeah. Thank you for being here and being able to clarify some things to be able to go and do that. I guess I'm wondering, for your perspective, looking ahead to 2025, what changes you were planning or envision making in how both the Prairie Oak units are managed, future units might be managed, and the existing 24 units. You said there were another 24 units elsewhere. Under your leadership, what would be different?
Well, it's hard to say what would be different because I don't know everything they do behind the scenes in those 15 units. I think that the way we would do it is, or in the way we do it for our other units right now, right, is we make sure to the best of our ability that the people who are moving into those units are ready to go for those units. Now, housing first is a part of that. in those units. Those units, because of the way the funding works, Housing First is a part of that. And to the earlier discussion, I think there's some real benefits to Housing First in that it's hard to find employment. It's hard to go to school. It's hard to build some stability for a family and for an individual if you don't have a place to stay. On the other hand, there are times when people aren't ready for that. Right. And so it is kind of a slippery slope, and it is something as an organization and as staff, we have to be very careful of and aware of and how we do that. You know, we'll run pretty thorough background checks. One of the things we're looking at doing as part of our services contract that, again, during COVID has been pretty tough is, and we just had our first one last week. I think it was last Monday and Tuesday, we did 2 different ones, is we kind of had a community meeting with that group. Right. And so we brought them all in and to talk about, you know, some things that were going on and some things we were doing as well, but making sure that we have an open dialogue with what's going on in those units, making sure we have good relationships with those residents so that when something comes up that we know. You know, we run background checks on people to make sure that they do not have any significant red flags, especially recently. We of course follow all fair housing laws and all that when we do our background checks. We also know that people who've experienced homelessness come with some, you know, trauma and some things that have gone on in their life that we have to be careful that we don't limit opportunities for people who are working towards building a life that they're proud of and excited about and being a, you know, a real positive part of our community. But I think, you know, to answer your question, we'd spend some time with the residents, making sure we're meeting regularly with them as individuals and with, you know, them as a whole in things. We're planning some workshops and stuff coming up here in the fall on that around some employment and financial coaching. And again, you know, being a landlord was really tough during the last 3 years, to be honest with you. There was a lot of things that the landlords weren't able to control in terms of the eviction moratorium and what we could hold people accountable for is when they did things that, you know, we weren't excited about in the units. We know as an affordable housing provider, as an organization that provides services to those who are currently experiencing homelessness or have in the recent past, is that, again, there's some barriers and there's got to be some leeway there. I also know that when you have 15 units that are all together, if one unit is having some problems, there's 14 other units we have a responsibility to. When we have the Gravelly Glade Commons, if there's one unit that's a problem, we need to work with them. We also need to realize that we have a responsibility to those 24 other residents to make sure that they're living in a building in a community that's safe and stable and that they feel comfortable coming home to as well. And so it does become about how we screen to make sure the people coming in are ready. They're going to make the most of the opportunity and that they're ready to go. It also means that we're keeping regular communication, again, with individuals, building strong relationships with those individuals and building strong relationships with the group as a whole as well.
So essentially, all, as you just described, is the process that deals with your 24 non-Prairie Oaks units. And do you then not use a property management contractor? So you have an in-house staff with that expertise to do that?
Mm-hmm.
When we look at in 2025 and shortly thereafter, you're having responsibility for another 40 units. Do you have the staff capacity and experience to operate in the same way, or will you have to perhaps look at contracting some of that work out?
So we would look at probably adding staff to do that. I'm a fan of doing it in-house, again, to build the strong relationships and to have as much influence on it. I think it's one thing if you're a large landlord where you have big properties all over the place. It's another thing when those 40 units are in your parking lot. You know, I think it would be beneficial to the residents there and to us as an organization to do it ourselves. It may mean adding staff. It may mean some adjustments in how we do it. You know, we have a contract maintenance person, right? That maybe when we're adding 40 units to the other 24 and we're in the mid 60s, we may need to have somebody full-time on that too. I don't know. That's something we're gonna have to work out and see what it's like. Of course, I hope when you have 25 new units, that you're not gonna need to do a lot of maintenance. But as you know, that's not always the case. Sometimes that first year you need an extra lot of maintenance sometimes. So we may have to look at adding some staff.
So just what's the financial model for the business? I mean, you charge the residents rent in their permanent supportive unit. Is the model that the rent will cover the cost of staff and maintenance and I don't know, are the residents responsible for utilities?
Right now, it depends on what unit you live in for us. Some they are, some we take care of. But yeah, the model is that for the most part, rent covers the costs. And in some cases, rent also covers the cost of staff to provide services to the residents there as well.
So in your 24 units and in the 15 Prairie Oaks units, how has rent evolved? You know, we hear in the city that in many places rent is evolving exponentially. But how has it been for those folks who live in units that you either fully control or
Provides
partially control?
So for the units we fully control, it's been pretty stable over the last couple of years. We've raised it a little bit, but not much. For the most part, if you've been a tenant that's paying your rent on time and handling your business, we haven't raised it at all. Sometimes when somebody moves out, we may look at a small increase. We believe that affordable housing really matters, and we believe that affordable housing is really a need for, you know, the city of Lakewood and for Pierce County as a whole. So we're doing our very, very best to make sure that the units we own are affordable. We have one of the houses next door to us. It's a 2-bedroom. We're right now in the process of changing it over. As one tenant moved into one of our other units as their family grew. You know, it's going to be under $1,000. It's going to be under $1,100 for a 2-bedroom with a nice yard, which in today's age is very reasonable. And that, quite frankly, the resident who's going to move in works in the town center here, and so it's has 3 kids, and it's going to be an affordable situation for her.
Okay, and I am not fully aware of the nuances that go in with following the housing first philosophy. Okay, but you mentioned that that's sort of been something that has over past years has been a driver for identifying residents.
Well,
And let me just say, I'm trying to understand what housing first means. Does that mean that you look for residents that are currently unemployed, get them housed, and then do that? And are you excluding employed homeless people?
so no, so and this is the way the county runs its homelessness programs. Is that so? We also, besides the 24 units that we currently own and the services we provide in the 15 Prairie Oaks units, we also do some emergency sheltering where we currently have 2 apartment units where we have an emergency shelter. And we're trying to find a third. If anybody knows anybody who has a 2-bedroom on the ground floor, we would love to know. We're doing that. Those are the things that are funded by the county in terms of services. It's Housing First. What that means is people go through what's called the coordinated entry system. If you're homeless, you call in, you fill out a bunch of paperwork, or you tell somebody on the phone a bunch of stuff about yourself and they fill out the paperwork. You go into the system and that system says Prairie Oaks has an opening. We let the system know Prairie Oaks has an opening and they send somebody to us, right? The goal is that that person gets housed in that first before anything else. They may be working, they may not be working, but the first thing we take care of is housing. The first thing we take care of is housing. After that, we move on to everything else. Growing your income, maybe some mental health, finding a therapist, finding a counselor, getting enrolled in school, going to Clover Park or Pierce College, something like that. The first thing you do is housing. No matter what, you get housed. And so that's how the Prairie Oaks works. In the other 24 units that we own, that is not what we do. It is, we have an opening. We do it like many landlords. A lot of times we just do it by word of mouth or people we know, right? This is somebody that needs a place to stay. They fill out the application, go through the background check. We talk to them, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily in those 24 units that we own. It's not a Housing First model. It is affordable housing. It is, we decide who those tenants are. They apply. They don't go through the system. They don't go through the coordinated entry system. And again, like any landlord, any property owner, pay your rent, take care of the space, handle your business. You can live there, as long as you want to. And for the Gravelly Lake Commons project, that's what we're looking for. And to your point is that we do some emergency sheltering. We are involved in the permanent supportive housing. We do what's called rapid rehousing, where we help people find apartment units, places to live, where we may help with the first month's deposit and maybe a few months of rent while they find that employment and build their financial foundation and the stability of having a place to stay as they move forward. And then they take over that rent on their own. Those are things that we do. For the Gravelly Lake Commons project, it is going to be, part of the way you pay your rent is based on your income. Right. And so I'm a big believer in that. As I said, affordable housing is an issue. Affordable housing is right now an issue for all of us, even some of us who make really good money over the average median income. As I tell the story to a lot of people, if I sold my home today with all the equity that I have and tried to buy it, my mortgage would skyrocket, right? I don't know if I could afford the home I've lived in now for almost 4 years, right? And so it's for everybody, but the Gravelly Lake Common units we would look at your income. We would look at people who are 30% of the median income of the area, 50% of the median income of the area. But yeah, we assume most of them would be working, if not all of them. And if they weren't, they would be working pretty quick. We really see the Gravelly Lake Commons project as just a step on the ladder in that, I get in there, pay 33% of my income, 30% of my income. I get stable. I build a financial foundation. I increase my income over time. I increase my savings. I can go out and get my other unit and we move somebody in. It just becomes a pipeline of people building a life in those units, moving on to the next thing so the next group can come in and build their life in those units.
Okay, I guess I would just imagine from what you just described, you described that you're not able to afford the house you're in now, and you wouldn't be able to afford to move on to a bigger house. But that's the expectation for your tenants?
No, because I think that, I have a mortgage. It's not based on my income, right? Part of the way we would do the rent is based on how much you bring in, right? Financially, you know, one of the tenets of financial health is that your living expense is about a third of your take home, right? And, you know, that is what we'd be looking to charge people, right? So if you're working at Amazon over here and your take home's $3,000 a month, we'd be looking at charging you around $1,000 a month for rent. That way, you have enough financial resources, again, to build your savings, to invest it in your growth wherever you see what's best, whether that's going back to school, whether that's putting it away in savings, so that you can build that financial stability so you can go out and then move on to the next thing.
Okay, and my last question, several points in your comments this evening, you spoke about tenants having rules and obligations to comply with that haven't always been able to enforce those because of other rules that were in place because of COVID to be able to go and do that. But could you give us just an example of what are some of the rules and obligations that go with a person being in your permanent supportive housing?
Well, it's like, I think any regular tenancy, right? The people who are on the lease are the only people who live in the apartment. If you have pets, it's a certain number of pets, right? That you pay your rent on time, that you're not being loud and disturbing neighbors, that you're not tearing up the apartment, those kinds of things, right? Those are the kinds of things that during COVID, for example, if you had an unauthorized tenant with you, that was not a reason you could evict. If you didn't pay your rent, that was not a reason you could evict. That has now changed as those regulations have been been done away with. And so those are things we're going to hold people accountable for. You know, the thing is, we're very aware of and people who have experienced homelessness and people who've been chronically homeless, you know, being in an apartment for 6 months is not going to be enough, right? You need some long-term stability, again, to build that financial future. So your kids can go to school at the same school for a long time and thrive. And so you can grow your income. So all those things are important. And we believe it's going to take, you know, more than 6 months to do that. It may take a year or 2 years or 3 years to get through that. We also know that we're not going to, like, these 25 units aren't going to meet the need, right? And that we know that if somebody is in one of those units and they're not, you know, living up to their obligations, there's a line of people waiting for that, right? There's a line of people waiting for that we need to give that opportunity and that resource to as well. And so we're going to be very aware of that. As I said earlier, you know, if you have one tenant, one resident who is maybe causing some problems in the 25 units, we have a responsibility of those other 25 units, you know, those other 24 units to make sure that they're living in a safe and stable environment. It's not about just that one person. It's about the community as a whole. It's also about the community as a whole and all those other people that are possibly waiting for that unit, that right now with the, you know, some of the things that are going on with the homelessness crisis is that there are plenty of people waiting for those units. And so we expect you to live up to your end of the bargain so that if you don't, we know there are other people that also need those resources desperately, and we want to make sure they have the opportunity to access those resources as well.
Thank you. And thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Councilmember Wilkie.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Moss. So help me out here because the numbers are in like 3 different spots.
Yeah.
So, and I'm trying to do sources and uses. And the total cost that you have here on page 13, 10.3 million, that's outside of the land costs because you're going to split those. It sounds like because you have a future development plan. So a couple questions on this. First of all, how much have you already spent?
Excuse me?
How much money have you already spent?
Next to nothing.
Huh?
Nothing.
No, next to nothing. So when you say, so all the soft costs, none of those have been You haven't done any architectural fees or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
Now, I guess I will say, we may, once we get funding, we may pay ourselves for some of the work we've done on this, which is, as the developer, we may do that.
So how confident are you of that 10.3 million?
You mean that that's what it's gonna be?
It says 10.3 and then, but earlier in the thing that I'll flip to, it says 10.5.
Yeah.
I mean, you're guessing 10.5.
Yeah, I'm guessing, it's hard to say. I've talked to a couple of, we have some remodeling going on in our building, so I've talked to that, contractor, I've talked to other couple contractors from Parson Groups and, have a lot of contractors. I don't know, prices are going up on everything. It sounds like lumber has started to go down. What the prevailing wage is and those kinds of things may go up. I feel pretty good that 10.5 is ballpark, right? It'll be close, but depending on, you don't know what the price of lumber is gonna be in, let's say, 12 or 18 months. You don't know, just other things that may come along that may increase the prices in terms of supply chain and all that stuff. It seems the contractors that I've talked to in the last month or so feel good that prices are coming down, but they're also not getting super excited like this is where it's gonna be as well.
So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, there we go. So the 10.5 that was me rounding off numbers. I like simple math, so it's just easier when you're doing a project to go 10.5, and my math is quick and easy. The other thing is the development costs. They've been working with a developer in Seattle. The name escapes me, but they're a fairly long-term large developer. They're working with Korean Women's Association right now. They're developing, I think it was 120 units or something. So the individual that's doing that project has run these numbers 3 times. So they're fairly confident in their numbers.
So to follow up on that, then on Pierce County, 3.5 million ARPA. The state, 500,000, and I just think that was just through members, right? Or that was just an ask.
Yeah.
1 million from us, the 2.5 million from the federal government. How confident are you in that? Is that going to go through an appropriation process or?
So I spoke to our contact there last week. He thinks that in the next month it'll move along. He said, I don't think it'll be 2.5, it'll be more than 2. So it'll be close to 2.5. He feels very confident in it. Again, most of that was lined up before I got here, so I don't have a great feel because I'm not the one who was in those rooms. But he feels very confident it's more than 2 and close to 2.5. So he's a professional, so I'm gonna trust him.
Okay, so then, and then another 2 million from us, that's what you're asking for. And then it says in here remaining 942,000, and that's your, hopefully it's lower if prices go down. So I kind of want to revisit the state. So is it new market tax credits, or they have this tax credit program, which you used in the previous Prairie Oaks? You're not using here, and then explain what happened with the Washington State Housing Finance Authority and why you didn't get any money. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that you asked for money, you did not receive it. What happened?
So my understanding from the Housing Trust Fund is that we are on the wait list. I will say the wait list is very long with a lot of dollars. My understanding of the way the Housing Trust Fund works, and we will talk about how it's worked in the past and how it works as we're going to apply again, is that what the Housing Trust Fund really likes, and Jeff can, I think, speak to this probably better than I can, but they really like when they see significant local investment, and they really like being the last dollars in. And so that application for the Housing Trust Fund is open again. It's due September 18th. By then, I hope to hear from all of you and from the federal government to where we are. That will probably greatly influence our ask and what we ask. But that if we can go to them, that we can say, whatever, it's your $1 million means a shovel goes into the ground in 4 months. I think that gives us a very good chance, whereas what was asked for last time didn't necessarily mean the shovel goes in the ground.
I can follow up with that a little bit. So I have a little bit of insight because typically what happens on Housing Trust Fund is the Tacoma, Lakewood, and Pierce County, the three of us have representatives that kind of, and Affordable Homeowner, I forget the other organization, there's another organization that we discuss funding applications. We kind of prioritize for the county. So we always look at kind of who's got our projects in the pipeline. And typically these things are 5-year projects usually. So we try and move them along, and we recommend to the Housing Trust Fund, hey, here's Pierce County's number one, and Pierce County being Tacoma, Lakewood, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the list. Usually what happens with Housing Trust Fund is 90% of the funds go to King County. It's not a great setup. It really isn't. So we usually recommend, there was a couple of years ago where we recommended a project. It was our number one project. They chose not to fund it and chose to fund the Spokane project. So there isn't necessarily any real hope that projects will be funded. History has shown that Pierce County tends to be kind of the last thought of that funding group, and they tend to fund larger Pierce County projects, larger Seattle projects. And we've had not a lot of success. Tacoma's had some success because they tend to have larger projects. There was on the wait list, I forgot, it was 22 projects on the wait list for $96 million. They awarded $57.2 million. So there's a fairly huge, literally double of what's available on the wait list. I do know that you're on the wait list, the losses on the wait list, but the wait list isn't going to be funded. So they've chosen to fund 2 different avenues. They were going to fund some projects that weren't fully funded, and then they're looking to fund different things. So the wait list, no one's getting funded on the wait list. Just so you know. I don't want to tell anybody, but that's ultimately what they're choosing to do. So the 22 wait list is done. The 23 applications are coming forward. They're looking at the Housing Trust Fund level, creating pools of funding for Pierce County and King County, as well as all other, Pierce County and King County, as well as all other jurisdictions. I hope that happens. If it does, the county stands to benefit greatly, because usually all of our funding is taken to King County. So if that happens, then yeah, we have a much better chance to get these funded. If it doesn't, it's not the greatest thing. It's rolling the dice, and you're waiting for lucky 7 to show up every time. So I wouldn't count on Housing Trust Fund dollars. I've never really counted on Housing Trust Fund dollars. They, like I said, they look for really the largest projects out there, and that's what they tend to fund.
So how are you going to fill that gap?
Well, again, we are going to submit that. To Jeff's point, I think one of the things we're waiting to see, because there is a chance that the way the Housing Trust Fund works this year, that somewhere between 11 and 13% of that money is automatically going to Pierce County. I think if that happens, we have a much better chance. So part of it will depend on that. I think we are aggressively looking at foundations and other donors and stuff like that as we go through. It's, I'm building my list. I'm reaching out and talking to a lot of people. We are looking at different options. Part of it is it's been a little difficult right now because, again, we have a lot of fluid funding, right? With the feds, with the city of Lakewood, with some of that stuff to see, quite frankly, the more you have, the easier it is to go to some of those other places. And I think they're looking to say, tell us what you actually have. So that we can say, okay, this is what we actually have. This is what we need. This is our ask to you. These are the other places we're going. So we're making lists of some foundations, some other things. We are, one of the things going to the earlier discussion about Prairie Oaks, we're being very aggressive about some of these asks so that we don't bring in anybody else. There can be development partnerships that we can bring in, but we're we're doing everything in our power not to do that so that we own the project 100%.
So I think this will be my last question on page 4 of the packet. The project will consist of a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And you give the location. Affordable housing units constructed as part of this project will serve low-income households at or below 80% of the area median income, with a focus on serving those at 30 to 50% AMI. A minimum of 1 unit will be set aside to serve eligible home ARP clientele, and you'll have to and Mr. Gum can maybe explain that to me. The 80% limit, 60% is mentioned. Okay, so nowadays we have to put everything in a bucket. Anything built that people are going to live in, you put a tent in your yard, you now have to fill the bucket of the state wants you to. So what are we talking? So it's not 0 to 30. So it's clearly not the very, very low income. Are you aiming for up to 80? Are they the ones who help pay the bills? And then you bring in a certain amount of 30 to 50, or how does that all? How do you see that shaking out in your 25 units?
I think the vast majority are going to be that 50 and below. That's our goal. That's where we think that is the biggest bang for everybody's buck. Like I said, you know, to Mike's question, you know, the people that are working, that have a family, that just need a chance to get some financial stability. We really see that as our target population, whether that's young families, whether that's seniors who are on fixed incomes, whether that's, you know, in this area, especially veterans who are coming out and may have some, you know, fixed income issues as well. That's really our target audience. You know, we're not, quite frankly, our hope is that when we have these units, there'll be some money in our pocket that helps us be more financially stable than we are now. On the flip side, we're not doing this to make a ton of money. We're doing this to give community members and neighbors, again, a platform to build financial long-term stability in their life and their family's life and generationally. That's what it's about. And so that's what our target group is going to be.
And I can answer from the numbers and the funding, and that's kind of my thing. So the numbers that you're talking about, there's home, assuming that council were to fund home ARP dollars into the project, as you mentioned, everything kind of goes through a sieve and comes out at the end. So home has a requirement. In this project, there's a maximum subsidy limit. So depending on how much money you put into a project, maximum subsidy per bedroom sort of a thing. So in $1 million project, realistically, you'd be looking at 3 home units, because the maximum subsidy for a 2-bedroom is about 370 or 380. I forget what it is. So you'd be looking at 3 home units. The home units have a restriction on the very first tenants have to be 60% or below AMI. So that's that number. So those 3 units, the home, what they would be called as home units, would be the 60% in year 1. After year 1, tenants could be up to 80% in those units. So it kind of depends on how the mix works out and how the rents work out and how the project cash flows. The home ARP dollars, there is no subsidy limit, which is really nice. They got rid of the subsidy limit. So the 1.175 that would go into the project, my recommendation would be to put it into a single unit, only because the home ARP is really restrictive. They have to be McKinney-Vento eligible people. So they're typically very, very low income. They're typically either recently homeless or they are homeless. One of the provisions in that would be veterans as well. They had a provision that they added to allow homeless veterans in there. My recommendation would be, if we're going to do this, let's serve a homeless veteran and make that the person that goes into. I mean, I'm not necessarily telling them what they can and can't do. I give them a list of here's who you can. My thought would be we're a military community, why not serve veterans as well? So if you restrict that to 1 unit, that is beneficial to the project, because if you follow the same logic where you're going to make more of those units and they're ultra low income units, the cash flow is restricted. So you try and keep that into 1 to allow it to cash flow. The other units, then the other 21 units would be open to whatever other funding streams are in there. And the way it's set up now, Pierce County has 3.5 million in ARPA funds. The city would be looking, I think there was a potential commitment of $1 million in ARPA funds. ARPA is very flexible, so there's no permanent supportive housing restrictions. It's just affordable housing. The home does not have permanent supportable housing. The home ARPA doesn't have permanent supportable housing. If there's housing trust fund dollars in the project, that then triggers permanent supportive housing. So it's interesting when you put these projects together. If you have a bunch of flexible funding and you introduce other funding sources that don't, you kind of restrict the whole project. So the way it's set up right now, with ARPA dollars and home dollars and federal dollars and state dollars, none of those trigger the services, which makes it a much more affordable project to run. You're able to choose the tenants that you want in those projects because you don't have to go through the coordinated entry. So it gives the developers, the owners, I should say, in this case, more flexibility in who they put in the units. It does give us a lot more kind of ownership as to the city as to who we want to put in those units. I mean, there's obviously fair housing law and those things apply, but I think it gives us a little bit more leeway as well as the owners to figure out who they really want to put in those units versus having to go through coordinated entry and supportive housing and housing first and all of those things. So that's the way I look at them.
Councilmember Bell.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. So my question circles back not to round to numbers, but I wanted to circle back to how you spoke about holding people accountable to the different things that need to be on the list that they need to be required to stay there. And we talked about the incident with the gun and how it was reported to I believe you said the property manager. So I wondered what processes have changed. Has there been any other safeguards implemented? I see that you have cameras up now. So I would like to know that there has been a change from that. If it was reported to the property manager and yet the incident still occurred, which I know those things can happen, but what are you doing to not only put some safeguards up for the actual tenants, but public safety for the rest of the area around there?
Yeah, so again, in those 15 units, we still don't have any control, right? We're trying to be more communicative. You know, for example, we had a situation where a couple weeks ago, a tenant complained that there was loud activity in the parking lot at like 2:30 a.m. We looked at the cameras, you know, we talked to the property manager, you know, we pretty much, I think, figured out what unit it was, right? Those kinds of things. Again, how the property manager and how the owner of those units go through, we still don't have control. We're just trying to be more communicative of that. We're making, you know, one of the things is I think tenants and residents are being more communicative with us as well about what's going on. Whereas, you know, there's times, and this is for everybody, right? Sometimes like, I'm not gonna be the one that says something, right? I think people are more willing to speak up now again, and we're trying to do more, bring them together, you know, in terms of doing some events with them and stuff like that as well.
Councilmember Anderson.
I think one thing that wasn't abundantly clear from the earlier explanation of housing first through the earlier discussion is that it's essentially no barrier. You can be a drug addict.
Yeah.
You can refuse to take any services. From what you've described in the mix as it's currently contemplated, could you and would you be more selective in tenants and have covenants with your tenants that they had to be law abiding and take services?
Yeah, I mean, the 24 units that we own now, right? We have what I would say is a very standard lease that almost any landlord has. And again, we want to make sure that all 25 units are safe and stable. We want to make sure that all neighbors are safe and stable. We want to make sure that also community members who are going to make the most of that resource and that opportunity are the ones able to get into those units. And so, again, we wouldn't go through any of that housing. The plan is, if everything goes according to plan, which it has so far, right? And the way we've gone about the funding, the way we have is, we want to have total control over who those residents are.
Is there any contemplated backup financing source that may have housing first type, no barrier requirements?
Not at this time.
Thank you.
To follow up really quick, the only funding source that would have a requirement to not require services, which doesn't make any sense to me, it's home. So the 3 home units and the 1 home ARP can't require services for home funding.
But with home funding, you still can screen the tenants for their
Oh, yeah.
behavior.
Yeah, you can add other restrictions and so forth. You just can't make them participate in services. You can encourage them, and most of them in our home programs partake of those services already.
One of the things that I wanted to follow up on, from Councilmember Bell was on my question list, is to the safety of the residents. Do you have a program in place where everybody knows where to look and what to do should emergencies arise? Is there a process, or is it because of the separation that you're not involved with?
It's because of the separation. So we talk to residents all the time about individual safety, being safe, how to report things, all that kind of stuff, right? It's really more of an individual thing than a community thing. Is that, I want to say, for the most part, the property management group and the owner, it's been a very successful thing for the first 8 years of it. And so, again, with all the people who receive our services, we're very, these are the things, these are the steps you need to take if something is going wrong, if something's not going wrong, these are things you can do, these are people you can call, these are resources you can access.
Yeah, that's so important in the way the world is going today. That would be very helpful to everybody to be on the same page and know what to do. So thank you. You may continue with your presentation.
That was all I had. Depending on how things go, the next step, if council chooses to move forward, would be to bring a funding proposal for the 1.175 million in home ARP dollars and 1 million in home to council for approval for this project. And that would be done at a future presentation where we can make that work in the timeframes.
As far as the next steps, do the council have any other requests? Very good.
I just want to say thank you for having me here today. Thank you for the funding and just thank you for your involvement with us over the years. We really appreciate it. And please reach out if you have any other questions or want to want to come see what we do at LASA. I'm more than willing to talk to anybody and have you come see the great work we do. So I just really appreciate all that you do for the city of Lakewood and all you've done for LASA in the past. So thank you very much.
Well, our hats off to you, like what you're doing, stepped in with the whole fire. So good luck to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. The next item for discussion is a call on acting city manager Todd Kraus and Lodge and Tax Committee members, Ms. Smith, to talk about our lodge and tax.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and council members. We have here, as you mentioned, Linda Smith from the Lakewood Chamber of Commerce. We also have attending virtually is Dean Burke from Travel Tacoma and Mount Rainier and Sports Commission. And I believe Jarnell Singh from Comfort Inn Suites may be joining us. I have a very brief overview of where we are in the forecast and what the timeline is for the next round of allocation. So on page 16 is the balances that are available for the 2024 grant allocation. The estimated total ending fund balance at the end of 2023 is $3,240,000. And the amount that has been earmarked for the McGavick Center is $101,850, leaving $3,139,000 available for allocation. That $3,138,000, 3% is restricted, and that total is $1,698,000. And the portion that is reserved for the less restricted portion is $1,440,000. All of the 4% can be used for the restricted, but not vice versa. In terms of the grant application process, we're looking to open the grant period on July 31st and close it on August 21st. The tentative schedule for the Lodging Tax Committee to review the applications and make a recommendation is on September 22nd. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it over to Linda if she would like to say anything, and also to Dean.
Smith.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, City Council members. My name is Linda Smith, and I'm with the Lakewood Chamber of Commerce. I almost want to defer to Dean first as our umbrella organization for the entire county of Pierce. Dean, do you want to kind of set the stage and talk a little bit about what you're doing as a whole, representing the entire county? And then I can kind of focus on what we're doing here that's more Lakewood centric.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Great, thank you. Good evening, council. My name is Dean Burke. I'm the president and CEO of Travel Tacoma Mount Rainier Tourism and Sports. That's our consumer facing name. We are the Convention and Visitor Bureau and Sports Commission for all of Pierce County. This is my first meeting on your LTAC committee. I have only ever spoken to your LTAC committee in the past as a presenter, as a recipient. As you may be aware, Shalene Potvin-Bird from our team has moved on in her life and career, and so I'm replacing her seat on this committee. So I'm happy to tell you just quickly kind of what we do, but I do want to tell you also that I really came into this meeting to listen, to make sure that I'm hearing how you all work. Again, I've looked at this through our lens, but not through the entire committee lens. So I do not want to come in here like a bull in a china closet. So, but we do serve organization countywide, and so from north to south, from Fife to DuPont, and from west to east, from Gig Harbor through most of Mount Rainier. As you know, a piece of East Mount Rainier is another county. And we do work under three primary pillars of development: conventions and meetings, sports, and leisure. Two of those three pillars are group business focused, meaning we are writing business to attract pretty well-defined groups that we can count, and with crisp edges around them that we can really define the impact that's happening. And then that third piece, leisure, a much harder group to quantify, because that is, individuals that we're working with and working to bring in to enjoy the many things that our county has to offer. So we are what we call a room nights first organization. And that's kind of our own internal lingo, and it makes sense within our industry in that our mission focus is our North Star is tourism that leads to room night generation, hotel room night generation. We want that, we define that metric as the lead because our biggest funding partners make that their priority. So we set all of our partners to that metric. It is the hardest one. So we want that bar nice and high, and we want it the same across the board. And as it pertains to Lakewood specifically, we've had some tremendous successes in our recent past. You might remember things like in 2019, the U.S. National Championships of Cyclocross, where we celebrated 48 states of athletes coming in from across the country for for over a week and Fort Steilacoom Park. And we have more of that in the books coming, more excitement in that regard that we're working on now, and some international products. We've also done a tremendous amount with cross-country running as a big development. Our sports pieces work really well for us in Lakewood. And then, well, I could talk way too long on this, and I know it's a late evening already. So that's just kind of a quick snippet for me on us. I'm thankful for being here and looking forward to participating and learning. And thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Smith?
Thanks, Dean. I would just like to follow up and we've had this conversation over the years, but the Lakewood Chamber of Commerce serves as the lead destination marketing organization for Lakewood, and we serve as the Visitor Information Center here, not only representing Lakewood but Pierce County, South Sound, as well as the state of Washington. So as visitors come to our Visitor Information Center, we obviously sell Lakewood first and foremost and encourage them to stay and overnight here. But we also have information about our entire region. So we do serve as a Visitor Information Center that would be considered state qualified. We primarily have been working over the past several years on the leisure market. We do serve as backup and support services for any groups that are meeting here in the area, but we do not have our primary focus set on that at this point. That's where we let Travel Tacoma do the heavy lifting, and we provide the support services there. We are excited about seeing some numbers increasing. COVID was not a good time for the travel and leisure market, and we're seeing a significant uptick in the number of visitors that we're getting through our Visitor Information Center, as well as the visits that we're getting on the Chamber's website, specifically to the tourism market. So we're averaging about 5,000 unique visitors. That's not the number of times they visit the website, but unique visitors on a monthly basis, which is significantly higher. And we've more than doubled the number of walk-ins that we're getting at the Visitor Information Center. So we've been doing television commercial ads, and I think that always piques interest and curiosity. And then we also provide, and believe it or not, people still want brochures and maps. And so that's why our Visitor Information Center is still open. We have a lot of folks that obviously utilize apps and get their information that way. But we do have a significant number of the traveling public that's still interested in coming in, talking to people, asking for recommendations, and walking out with paper in their hands. And so we provide those services as well. I think that's about it, unless you have any questions. But I really want to thank all of you for, first of all, working with the hospitality industry in promoting economic development throughout Lakewood and throughout Pierce County. A lot of times when people think about the tourism and convention business, they think it's just party, 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 but it's all about the numbers. It's all about the room nights, and it's all about generating jobs as well as the tax base here. So thank you for all of the years of working with us. We look forward to
Thank you for the information. I'm just curious, does Summerfest, do you show any increase in overnights through Summerfest?
We have yet to see the numbers for Summerfest, so it will be interesting. But one of the things that we've talked about in the past is summer in Seattle has been really good. And when summer in Seattle and King County is good, it's great for Pierce County. You know, it's one of those, I think, numbers crunching that city staff, I believe, does on an annual basis. And they check with their vendors as well as the folks that come and participate. So they do come up with some numbers at the end of the year. So we'll be interested to see what happens there.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Are there any questions from the Councilmember Branstetter?
Yeah, thank you. I do know, I do appreciate and always curious about how the Summerfest impacts. It certainly attracts a lot of people. The question is whether it attracts them into beds, okay, or being able to go and do this. And I think that numbers this year will be difficult to track because of Summerfest occurring concurrently with the air show on JVLM. That so they're both going to be draws. So the question is, how do you apportion the impact between those to do that? Actually, my question has to do with, we have this restricted category of dollars, and the way that it's written, it's essentially the dollars have to be spent in relationship to convention facilities, to build them or manage them and being able to go and do that. And we essentially had the McGavick Center as meeting that definition, and I think that we can to do that. But we have recently had some discussions that there was a further modification of that to say that they had to be facilities with a city proprietorial interest. It can't just be a convention facility. It's got to be something that the city owns or has some kind of an interest that a lawyer can argue meets the extent to do that. And then we've quite honestly had some discussion internally regarding that should Partners for Parks be successful in their multi-million-dollar fundraising to initiate the rehabilitation of the H barn, as to whether the H barn is a small meeting place and facility will meet the definition of being able to allow to access the 3% lodging tax dollars. And I guess, is that something that either the committee or staff has researched or thought about?
Yes, and my understanding is that it would meet the criteria. So from the construction acquisition, city-owned facility, as well as meeting the 1 million visitors.
But it meets the convention
It's actually
definition.
It's actually not just for convention. The way that it's written is it can be used for acquisition, construction, expansion, marketing, management, and financing of convention facilities and facilities necessary to support major tourism destination attractions that serve a minimum of 1 million visitors per year.
So on the summary you provided, that's just a simplified
Yes,
definition of the restriction. It's not that tight.
yes.
Mhm. Okay, well, I think I think that the process that the committee has used for the past multiple years has gone smoothly. Okay, that it does seem that we continue to fund the usual suspects. So what do other than just announcing July 31st, we're accepting applications? What do we do to try to expand both awareness of that this may be something that an organization or a group that's planning to do something in Lakewood might apply for to do that. But it doesn't seem we get a lot of new applicants every year.
Well, we'll continue working through our communications manager on advertising that. So yes, it's true, we do notify the past and previous awards recipients, as well as those who applied who might not have received it. But then we're also relying on our communications manager to get the word out. And so she's been doing that. But we'll continue to look for other ways to share that information.
Okay, because it just seems that with the exception of the Asian Pacific Cultural Center, that few applicants represent activities that are going to be put on that are targeting the audiences in diverse communities. Or going on to do that, and that just the way it is has evolved. They've, we dealt with sports and arts primarily, and with the greater emphasis that we want to place on making sure that this is a way to help a variety of the communities within the city that represent its diversity to put on events and attract people here to be able to go and do that. It doesn't seem that this has been a tool that's been helpful in that way yet.
Well, I do believe that, was it this past year? These years kind of melt together for me sometimes. I apologize. I believe there was an organization that applied for lodging tax dollars, and I believe that it was an event, but they were no shows for the presentation. Todd, do you remember?
Yes.
Was this past year? Or was it the year prior?
That was the year prior.
Okay. And I don't remember the name of the group. I apologize for that. There has also been groups that and associations that have come in and out of events promotions. I believe that there was I can't even remember her name, I apologize, but there was a Korean festival that was very specific that has applied for and received lodging tax grants in years past as well. But point I believe is well taken. I think that there's an opportunity for a number of different groups, but I do believe that there is criteria involved as well, and that is fulfilling things like being a nonprofit organization, that type of thing. I'm not sure about event producers coming in and applying for lodging tax dollars. Maybe you can help out with that.
Yes, they are required to be a nonprofit.
Okay, so any organization that just wants to do a for-profit type of an event cannot apply for the lodging tax dollars, correct?
Councilmember Bell.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I think that Councilmember Branster makes a great point that outreach to these groups needs to happen. Currently, the city seems to be the ones that puts on the events that are focused on diversity. So it would be great to see other groups like the Asian Pacific Cultural Center step up, apply for these types of grants so we can get local people, local groups to do that also. And I think that that is a great point that he's made. So some sort of outreach as a committee, as a communications manager here, that Ms. Grimley could reach out. But I think an extra effort in trying to get people to apply for that, other than just it being the city's sole responsibility to provide diverse forms of entertainment, recreation, so be it, would be great.
Councilmember Bulkey.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Moss. Just a couple of comments. I think as a council, and we've discussed capital items, and that got mentioned earlier, and we really do want to, I think we've done a pretty good job, and councils before us have done a pretty good job of making sure that we're putting a decent amount into capital, because I've always felt that Lakewood was capital poor in the sense that we didn't have the facilities to kind of get us over the hump. And that goes throughout everything that we have, right? That's why we invest so much in roads and parks, because we were capital poor from that standpoint. And I think the same goes on the tourist side. So, but I just want to ask an open-ended question, and this is for Ms. Smith and Mr. Burke. On the items over the last couple of years that you've funded, and as Councilmember Branstetter said, we're very consistent in our operational funding. What events or groups on that have surprised you to the positive side? Like, we funded them because we thought it was a good event or a good group to do, but wow, they have really run with this.
You really like putting me on the spot, don't you?
Well, I mean, you've got Mr. Burke there to help you too.
Well, actually, this is Dean's first year.
Oh, okay.
He's brand new, so as far as serving on LTAC. So yeah, we'll just throw it to Dean. No.
Yeah.
Gosh. Surprise. Go ahead.
I have something to lend to this, and if maybe this will just give you a little airtime to think more specific to that. And I apologize, I'm not going to answer specifically that question because clearly I don't have the history looking at what else was funded in here specifically. But I have been involved with all of the LTACs across Pierce County, and I've served on the biggest LTAC committees in other pieces of this. So I guess what I'll bring at this is maybe just a little bit of perspective from that, and kind of addressing some of the other questions that just came up, as well as far as outreach goes. One of the things that the by and large, most municipal level LTACs do not have in place is a clear definition of the goals they want to achieve with their LTAC. There are some rules written around the advice on how to use it, but at that point the committees kind of generally tend to take their hands off and just shop what comes across the desk in terms of applications and go from there. At the Pierce County level, that was solved by an adoption of some internal committee goals and rules that amplified the state legislation rules as written by LTAC. LTAC rules, by and large, at their very core, are a poorly defined set of rules and regulations. If you go out across the state and you take a look under the hood at how each LTAC committee operates and their standards and what they're reporting on and such, you will see a tremendous amount of variance in what's being done, and a tremendous amount of variance in what you might consider the ROI of those as well. So at the county level, when I served on that committee, I've termed out, so I'm not on there right now because of that. But what we did was worked with a big ecosystem over a couple of years to define some rules and ROI pieces to say it's not just that are you going to come create rooms, but how many, what are the goals here? What is your metric for success on this? Because at some point, if there's an inversion between what you spend and what you return back, then, you might think how that approach a little bit. So I tend to, when I hear conversations that point at, maybe first saying, how do we get the message out to wider groups? That's good. That's okay. But I also, my first question within that is, well, what has been done within the existing kind of usual suspect, if you will, to raise the bar, to say, how can each of these groups and others that may come along as well, perform at a higher level, be more clear about their goals, and where they can't be, because sometimes groups show up in these things that don't have the know-how or the horsepower or the administrative structure, whatever it may be, to do that thing. But maybe there's other groups that can help them achieve that. And so there's a few ways to rethink that process. So I just kind of present that out here as that's some thinking and some practices and some logic that I'm going to bring to this conversation as a committee member, that might look a little different than prior. It's not to say what's been done has been right or wrong. It's just some different ways to ask questions and determine how we might, as a group, look at it, and maybe bring some things in line with some of the bigger LTAC initiatives that are happening outside of the four walls of Lakewood. In my opinion, possibly make this fund even stronger and make the dollar that it has go farther as well. And then, so to hand this back over to Linda, I think as she ruminates and looks back on what has been a surprise but what's been a success, I think as we look through it as a committee, going forward with some new insights, again, maybe we can ask what more could be done within these, because I bet there's quite a bit of growth we could find.
So Dean, I'll follow up with that from a county-wide perspective. Where do you see the growth? Where's the best source of growth for countywide heads and beds? Is it sports? I mean, I went to this cross-country meet that had hundreds of people from all over the Western United States running at it last year. Is it sports? Is it just general tourism? We always hear about Mount Rainier. Where do you see the growth in the market?
It's a long answer to that question. I do apologize. I'm not going to give you a long answer, but I will say that our strength, our diversity is our blessing and our curse as a county, with the amount of geographic diversity and the amount of social diversity that infills that. We do an awful lot of things here, more so than if you compared us to a market like Dallas. Okay, I always kind of pick on the flatland guys a little bit because their opportunities are much narrower and their kind of focuses are much narrower. But when we go from a big national park volcano to saltwater shorelines and all this in between, there's a lot of different things in there. So I say that to say that we tend to go through kind of with a fine-tooth comb and look at what is happening, what is performing, how is it performing, really take kind of a health report on each individual thing, and then determine where are the growth opportunities in there. Now, in big pillar conversations, things like sports are generally an extremely high ROI because it's big group business, and we have some pretty strong assets here to attract that stuff. There's always a need for more. The leisure end, we have a very big industry for that here, but it can be it's a hard sector to manage sometimes in terms of focus dollars, especially when budgets are small, and our area budgets are not all that big respectively. So I think the path to that is to both look internally within this LTAC and Lakewood's Fort Walls and the opportunities that we know are there, what could be better, what could grow, how do those reflect outside of the Fort Walls with the neighbors around throughout Pierce County, and between the two, where are the opportunities that can go from there. the comment earlier about Summerfest, and its return toward tourism. Always tricky when you're dealing with peak season events. We've got about a 10-week run here in the Northwest where events are just clamoring on top of each other. In Pierce County alone, that number is about 140 events in about a 10 to 12 week period. Continue north into King County, and that number grows upward of 500. This week alone, in between Seattle and here, there is the All-Star Game, there is the Vacation Races half marathon at Mount Rainier, there is the JBLM Air Show, and there's Summerfest all happening at the same time. Those four products alone account for tens of thousands of people, local and travelers, both. But point being, that's a lot happening at exactly the same time on the calendar. So it's just the devil in the details you have to go through as we kind of pave through and look at where those opportunities are. So apology, I don't have a succinct answer on where the big opportunity is, because it is a moving target, and it depends on kind of what the flavor of the season may be, and what the low-hanging fruit may be. But we're a big destination. There's lots to be had. And I think with this group here, the list of things that are happening at Lakewood now, I do believe that some focus and some sharpening points on this could elevate what is happening within the existing inventory.
Well, and I think that Dean hit the nail on the head, and that is, we have a lot going on in the summer months. So why aren't we putting our heads together and figuring out what to do during the shoulder season? That's our best bet. And that's why we were so excited when the Tacoma Pierce County Sports Commission, back in the day, that's what they were called, was bringing in business here to Lakewood. That was during the fall and winter. Best time to put heads in beds. And, you become a hero when you can really fill up those rooms and generate that business during the fall and winter season. So I think that really focusing on that time of the year is probably going to be the smartest for us, obviously the most lucrative, and obviously our launching partners are going to think we're heroes as well. So, yeah.
We have questions? Well, thank you for the report. Dane, welcome aboard LTAC. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
The next on our agenda for discussion is the Lakewood Housing Need Assessment. And for that, we call on Long Range and Strategic Planning Manager Tiffany Spears.
Thank you and good evening, Madam Deputy Mayor and members of the council. So I will move through this quickly. Tell me if I'm going too fast, please. Some of this information has been brought to you in different ways over the last 6 months or so, but there's some additional information being provided to you tonight, specifically out of the housing needs assessment performed in relation to the 2024 comprehensive plan periodic review. And then we also, as you know, have had several state legislative bills adopted in the last 2 sessions that really affect how local governments have to plan for housing in particular. So I'm going to touch on both of those things this evening with you. This is the third in a series of times where I will be in front of you and other staff will be in front of you to talk about various pieces of the 2024 process. The next time will be in August, where we'll be looking at land use and parks and open space. So if you think about the state law, regional policy, countywide policy, and then again, coming back to the legislative bills recently passed, you'll see that all on this slide summarized. First of all, you've got the Growth Management Act, of course, and then related to that is the buildable lands reports, which have to be done at this point every 8 to 10 years. The last time it was completed for Pierce County and its cities was in 2021. We now have the 2044 population and employment targets, which had just recently been updated based on House Bill 1220. And then related to that process was a Pierce County ordinance adopted 2023-22S, where there are new numbers for Lakewood housing units that are required per area median income share. Regional policy, we have a regional growth strategy and multi-county planning policies encompassed within Vision 2050. And then you have the countywide planning policies, and they reflect and are consistent with both the GMA and Vision 2050, but they also do have some local flavor, if you will, with Pierce County planning. And then there are 4 bills listed here. 1377 was actually adopted back in 2019, but it does talk about the requirement for local governments to allow religious organizations to provide affordable housing at higher densities on their property. And then there's conditions to that, of course. And then in 2021 was 1220. That bill talks about requiring local governments to plan for and allow emergency shelters and housing, as well as permanent supportive and transitional housing. And just a week ago tonight, you did adopt where those types of housing can be placed within the city of Lakewood. 2023 bills also include 1110, which is talking about multiple units on lots. And so this is where you see 2 units per lot, 4 units per lot. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then that final bill number is 1337, which is talking about accessory dwelling units and how those must be allowed and encouraged. So I just mentioned this quickly, but 1220 is the bill that says not only do you have to plan for those special needs housing, emergency housing and shelter, permanent supportive and transitional housing, which Lakewood again has now acted on, but there is 4 different economic bands identified: extremely low, very low, low, and moderate area median incomes. And on the slide in front of you, you can see again, that's broken out by area median income. One note is that this is Pierce County area median income, which is higher than the city of Lakewood's by about $20,000 a year. So when this planning happens, the city will be using the countywide AMI, but that will affect the price point that these units would be developed for. The outcome of Department of Commerce's new requirement to develop what they have now called their Housing for All Planning Tool, or HAPT, is here on the screen. And you've seen this before, but a quick reminder, Lakewood now needs to plan for a total of 9,378 new housing units, and then 574 additional units specifically that are emergency housing. The second table shows what income band or area median income percentage those need to fall into. So for instance, of the 99378 total, 1,212 are supposed to be permanent supportive units. 1,367 are for 0 to 30% area median income, but do not have to be permanent supportive units. And then you see 1,739 at the low income, the 30 to 50%, 1,375 units at 50 to 80%, 592 at 80 to 100, 536 from 100 to 120% of area median income, and then the remainder at the 120% plus. So these are the numbers that the city will be using as it prepares the 2024 periodic review policies and development regulations, as well as zoning recommendations to come through the Planning Commission to you. Just a reminder as well that there's already well underway within the Lakewood Comprehensive Plan areas of focus for residential development. First of all, you've got your Regional Growth Center, which is the same boundaries as the downtown. And then you also have the Lakewood Station District, which was a sub-area adopted in 2021. Those 2 are the big areas right now in terms of housing planning where units are scheduled to go. But you also have the Telecom sub-area, and that will be undergoing a full rewrite between now and when the 24 package comes to you. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see centers of municipal importance. These have been in the comprehensive plan for 10 plus years, and some of them are related to housing. Some of them are other reasons for focus. For instance, number 5 is Fort Steilacoom, and that's obviously not a housing focus, but there are other reasons to see that as a point of attention and care in the city planning process. So the housing needs assessment itself is something that was just completed in June. And from a very high level, in summary, there are some changes that need to happen with Lakewood's overall focus on the types of housing it plans for. Currently, the comprehensive plan contains a policy that says 25% of housing need to be directed to those making 80% of the median income or less. But actually now under that HAPT tool that Commerce developed and Pierce County implemented through their ordinance just within the last month or so, Lakewood needs to be planning for about 28% of its total target to those making 30% of area median income or below. So that's a significant change. The other thing is noting that the city is one that has produced over time and has more multifamily housing compared to single family than many jurisdictions, but that is where much of the next 20 years worth of growth also needs to be targeted. And it's both for the low and extremely low, but also high income households. There is real risk for displacement of people and businesses, particularly in the Station District area and then the Lakeview Kendrick residential areas. And then Lakewood also needs to be adopting the newly required policies and regulations addressing racially disparate impacts, displacement risk again, and then exclusion in housing. So I have a number of statistical slides here. I don't think I'm going to go through each one of them. They are all included within the full housing needs assessment, which we were provided in your packet this evening, but I'll just hit again very quickly. Please slow me down if I'm going too fast. Lakewood has had slow and low population growth since 2012. Within the county overall, Lakewood's population is younger than most other areas, and it's also becoming more racially diverse over time. Veterans are a key part of the population, and obviously with the relationship with now Joint Base Lewis-McChord, formerly Lewis and McChord Field Air Force Base, there are lots of reasons why we have a higher percentage of veterans in this area. Small families are the most common type of household, and there are in Lakewood a higher proportion than countywide of low-income renter households with members with self-care or independent living limitations. Population incomes, I mentioned this before, but as you see on that top chart there, the median income is laid out, and it's roughly a $20,000 gap for Pierce County versus Lakewood incomes. When you look at the population characteristics, if you'll recall, in the 2020 census, it was first recognized that Lakewood is actually a majority of BIPOC population. 48% or so of the population was white alone as of the 2020 census, and that continues to diversify. What you see here, though, is in red, the extremely low income, in pink is very low, lighter blue, low income, and then in the darker blues are the higher incomes. But in essence, if you look at the reds, you'll see that, for instance, Black or African-American renters, 28% of them are extremely low income and 16% are very low. And if you compare that to white alone is 16% and 15% in those two low income categories. So there's a definite difference, a seeable difference between various ethnic populations as to their economic levels here in the city. How financially attainable is in housing in Lakewood? For those of you involved with SHAPE, this might be familiar to you. These are documents that actually SHAPE just recently put together. And it's a different way of looking at some of the same information. But again, looking at homeowners and renters, 40% of Lakewood's households are cost burdened, meaning they're spending more than 30% on housing. And that was just discussed a little bit with the representative from LASA this evening. 17% of them are severely cost burdened, meaning they're spending more than half of their income on housing. In essence, to afford the median home sale price of $460,000 in Lakewood, the household needs to be earning $110,000 per year. And if I go back just a couple of slides, you'll see that the median income up there in that top chart is below that for Lakewood for the most part. Homelessness continues to be an issue everywhere, but just some stats specific to Lakewood. In the last point in time count that evening, which was January of 2023, Out of the 2,148 people identified that evening, about 5% of them said that their last reported zip code was Lakewood. You have, as of the first half of the year, Tacoma Rescue Mission serving 162 Lakewood clients. The chart that's right above that goes through the end of 22, and that shows all of the shelter providers, not just Tacoma Rescue Mission, but in that year, there were 596 in 2022. Workforce characteristics, very briefly, looking at the type of employment that you see between 2015 and 2021, there are a few shifts. There's an increase in services. There is an increase slightly in construction and resource. There's an increase in manufacturing by just 1%, and then warehouse, transportation, and utilities by about 3%. The charts below show you where people live in relation to where they work. Long story short, about 14% of Lakewood residents work in Lakewood, and the rest of them work outside of the city. About 16% of Lakewood's total workers are coming from Tacoma. That's the largest percentage. The next one after Lakewood itself would be Parkland, and then South Hill, and then University Place. But really, Tacoma and Lakewood are where the highest percentages of Lakewood's employees live. Talking about housing capacity. So is there room in Lakewood to grow like it's supposed to be planning to grow? In the 2021 Buildable Lands Report, that the answer was yes. And it was yes, because there was almost 2,000 units capacity identified, higher than what is identified for Lakewood. However, it's really important to recognize that most of that, 78% of that, is not on vacant property, it's on infill and redevelopment projects. So that's going to be a very different type of development happening over time, and perhaps different policy structures that the city needs to put together in order to encourage that type of growth. The other thing is that most currently zoning unit capacity is in the multifamily zones. So if you go to the chart, the second column on the top is Central Business District. You see there's 2,405 unit capacity on underutilized parcels. I hope that made sense. In multifamily one, there's the capacity for an estimated 1,251 units on underutilized parcels in that zone. Housing capacity, the other thing to see here on that chart on the top is the bolder parts of it are past actual permit activity and housing units created per year. And then you'll see the dotted line at a higher slant, meaning that the rate of production would need to increase in order to actually make it through to get to the number of units that have been identified for Lakewood by 2044. So it's a significant increase. Let's see. Rental housing, the market has obviously become tighter and tighter over time. That continues to be the case. Some multifamily housing sales have occurred, in particular to institutional investors, meaning it's not local owners selling to other local owners, mom and pop level type of ownership. These are bigger companies that may come in from other parts of the country, for instance, to purchase multiple units at a time. Housing cost burden, we talked about this a little bit already, but about all of the renters of all races and ethnicities are facing cost burdens, meaning either severely spending over 50% of their income on housing, or their cost burden, which is 30 to 50%. If you look at that chart again, the white alone is listed on the top at 22 and 28%. Black or African American is identified at 40% and 21%. And the Hispanic, Latino, any race is either 14% severely or 25% cost burdened. So comparing that to the white alone, again, we're seeing a definite difference between the white alone population and the Black or African American population.
Councilmember.
Before we go on there, if you compare the white alone to the Hispanic or Latino, top to bottom, those numbers are essentially reversed from the earlier depiction of income and do you have a reason for that? Is that
Let me go back and make sure I'm understanding where you're,
if you go on
this one?
there? Yeah, see? What-
Yeah. This is income as opposed to the housing cost.
Right.
So
Hispanic populations choosing to live in less expensive places. Is it
Correct.
multi-generational, so there are more people chipping in, is that,
yeah, it's the choice of housing to income comparison.
all right, thanks.
Yeah. Owner occupied housing, there of course is cost burden here as well, but it's also looking at the percent of people who are owning versus renting within the city. White alone, it's 53% ownership, 47% rent. Looking at those of color in cumulatively, about a third of them are owning versus 70% of them renting. Black or African American, 22% own, 78% rent. Hispanic, Latino, 30% own, 70% rent. So this is looking at, again, this idea of over time, and obviously this occurred prior to incorporation for the most part, but the pattern of owning and renting is very much along racial lines. Housing market trends, prices continue to go up, prices continue to increase faster than incomes. The one chart on the bottom that the dots on it are showing that right now, how to explain this? The ratio of home value to median income, meaning how many times your income is your house worth, I guess is the way I would say it. And in Pierce County, it's about 5.6 times your income is what somebody's house is worth. In Lakewood, it's 6.7%, meaning in relation to your house price, if you're a Lakewood resident, chances are your income is lower in relation to the price of the house. So that idea that was talked about earlier again with the LAHSA representative, can you move out of your own house and buy it again? The question is more likely to have an answer of no in Lakewood than it would in Pierce County.
We have a question, Councilmember Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you. You, in your discussion, you said that this is related to your house price, like the price of buying a house. And this, the slide says value, like what the assessor says your house is worth.
The ratio of home value there, that's not the assessor's value, that is market value. So right, what you're talking about right there.
Yeah, so what the slide says, the ratio of home value to median income.
Right.
So home value is what the house, what you paid for it, what you would have to pay for your, I'm thinking back to the gentleman from LAHSA here that said he couldn't afford to buy a house he lives in now.
Right.
But I would see value is what the assessor is, I'm having to pay my property tax on, whereas the price might be different if I was shopping for a house.
This is market rate housing cost, not assessed value cost. So say your house is worth $100,000 per assessed value, you might sell it for $125,000. This is using that $125,000 as the basis for the
So it's
ratio.
just a ratio of home prices to median
Yeah.
income.
Tiffany, are there any age demographics of homeowners that would explain that gap? We have a lot of retired people who own homes in Lakewood. If we have an overabundance of older homeowners who have fixed incomes and appreciated houses, that's going to tell us that we have old people owning houses. But I don't know that it tells us much else.
That could be, well, true. I need to go back into the full housing needs assessment and verify and be able to dig down a little deeper. I think would support the premise that some have that, again, people are kind of stuck in their house, whether it's by choice or not. If you own it now, you can keep it. You can't necessarily move. And the people that don't have houses yet can't get into them because they don't have the down payment, income, whatever. But yeah, you may well be right. So looking again at the 2044 housing needs, it's about 78% need to go on what are called underutilized parcels, meaning there's something on them, but more could fit per zoning and per size, to be very basic about it. This map, which looks a little unusual, it's not quite our zoning map, but it's broken out to show you where residential development happens in the city per its zoning. So the yellow stuff is the residential zones. The red and the orange is the commercial zones that allow mixed use and higher density housing. The brown is also multifamily housing. So these are the areas where the development of more units over the next 20 plus years would be focused. This map is showing you where, quote, underutilized parcels are located in the city. There's not a big concentration in one particular area. You'll see it's in most of the residential areas. It also is in some of the commercial areas, but if you go back to this and think about where housing units and densification is supposed to happen now under state law, and then look at where the underutilized stuff is, there is potential, assuming that the private property owner wants to move ahead and assuming development regulations and the market are also going to encourage them to do that. So getting into some of the bill requirements again, 1220 talked about identifying the number of units per area median income band. There's also things that are required under that bill, which include identifying areas of higher risk of displacement and establishing anti-displacement policies. Vision 2050 talks about identifying anti-displacement strategies and promoting home ownership opportunities while recognizing historical inequities. Our housing needs assessment conclusions in high summary again, we are a city that is more diverse than the county overall, and it's increasingly diverse over time. There are significant differences in income and home ownership percentages between white only and BIPOC and particularly African-American households. There are a lower percentage of high income or above median income in the Hispanic Latino population. And the Black or African-American renters are the ones facing the highest cost burdens in the local market. So racial disparity, very quickly, because I know we've discussed this here at a council meeting in the past. Over time, you'll see from left to right, it's countywide, but between 1960 and 2018, the red bar is white owned, the others are other ethnicities and races. The one that probably saw the highest increase is the Asian owned between 1960 and 2018. But you'll see also the yellow bar, which is an indigenous owned, that percentage went up a lot. And Latino and African-American follow that. These are the neighborhoods and then the specific parcels that were identified through the racial equity study that the University of Washington and Eastern Washington University partnered with over the last few years. There were about 930 racially restricted parcels in Lakewood. None of these covenants apply anymore. They haven't since 1968, but there are some of these still on deeds, and restrictions are still listed. And that quote right there is just a sample of what many of them read like. But the point of this is just to say that this did occur pre-incorporation in basically the middle corridor of the city. This map is now showing you today, and it's showing you the race distribution. The kind of lime green is white alone. The red is Black or African-American. And then the other colors, the darker colors, are other races or multiple races. But as you can see, and if you're familiar with census tracts or census block groups, where the darker colors are include Springbrook and Lakeview. They include the area in Monte Vista, which is up in the Air Corridor 1 and 2 zones. And I'm sorry that the screen is covering up Tillicum a little bit there in Woodbrook, but those are areas with a higher diverse population as well. What our housing needs assessment found was that Springbrook, Sounder Station area, and Lakeview Kendrick were those with the highest risk of residential displacement, meaning due to the instability of a household, but also due to development pressure. This is where the current residents face the highest risk of being either bought out or their landlord comes and tells them, I've sold the property, you can't be here in 6 months, whatever that may be. There was also an analysis, though, of businesses, and the International District does have some identified pressure for business displacement as well. Some of these are also maps that have been developed with other criteria regarding displacement risk, but long story short, it's the same areas of the city. Tillicum, Woodbrook, Springbrook, Lakeview, the east side of the city, Monte Vista, are all where the highest risk of displacement are. They are also the poorest areas of the city, and in many cases, the most diverse ethnically and racially areas of the city. Tree canopy, this is a kind of an aside, but it ties into this as well. This is something that was identified last year with the tree code, that these same areas of the city have the least amount of tree cover. And this was areas that were prioritized in the urban forestry and tree code program to be where tree plantings would occur first.
Ms. Spears, we have a
Yes.
question. Councilmember Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you. Could you go back to the displacement slide, the previous one? That where, displacement risk, was something that was discussed quite a bit when we were developing the station district plan, the folks that were doing that, and it was, and in the end, when we came up with the plan, displacement was something that we were worried about, but there were few concrete things we could put in the plan other than having some counseling available to help people move, to be able to go and do that. And in your presentation, where we've got to see 78% of our growth on underutilized properties, which means you have to displace what's on the property in order to get growth, and that most of the growth is going to have to be done by private development sector. I mean, it seems that there's a real tension between trying to build in rules for the development community that requires them to build things that can be occupied by the folks they're displacing. And I mean, and of course, the legislature didn't particularly look at that. And I understand you're the messenger of the legislature wanting Lakewood to grow in ways that maybe we don't to do that. But are there some examples of actually effective non-displacement strategies that communities have been able to put into code in planning? Or is that just like when we dealt with that, is it just something that you worry about, but that unless you're going to build the stuff yourself, you can't do anything about?
Councilmember Branstetter, there's a couple of things. First of all, Lakewood does have its rental housing safety program and its programs to support existing homeowners to preserve their housing, senior housing loans, et cetera. And those are actually seen as tools and best practices as guidance is provided to all of the jurisdictions in Washington. However, it's not the only answer, because obviously development, in order to meet all these numbers that we've suddenly been assigned, also needs to happen. So for Lakewood, it's a matter of balancing, continuing to do what it's doing to preserve some affordable housing, and then looking to how to incentivize or require, whatever the result ultimately will be, to say, for instance, okay, if you're coming in to redevelop this site that has multifamily housing on it right now, and you're going to increase it, you're going to have higher numbers total when we're done. You have to allow the current residents the right of first refusal, for lack of a better way to describe it, the right to be able to stay at that place, have a new place to live right there, and or you're offering relocation assistance. And so Lakewood already does assume relocation assistance itself, for instance, when there's an abatement or a nuisance issue that the city addresses, but also incorporating that into development discussions and rules and regulations going forward. So it's very much a moving target with all of this stuff so new, the ink isn't dry yet, but those are the ones that are kind of rising to the surface right now. It's what Lakewood already does with preservation, but then it's also how do you help those people either stay on that same site in the new housing or make sure that they at least have sufficient relocation assistance.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. One area of displacement which is unique to the city of Lakewood and maybe Airport Heights in Eastern Washington, I'm not sure. But again, we have Air Corridor 1 and 2, which is directly above the clear zone for North McCord Field. And there is quite a few housing units there. In the 2020 census, there was about 4,400 people living within that census tract that most closely fits those two zones in the city. It's planned to be emptied of residential units. They are all at this point non-conforming because of the safety concerns. And those units, those people in those units will eventually be moving into other parts of Lakewood, as well as maybe outside the city when the time comes or their houses, for whatever reason, no longer occupied. The city at this point is not pursuing things like amortization schedules or anything like you will be out as of date X, not at all. It's people live there, but there's very residential development is not allowed. So while other jurisdictions are talking redevelopment or new development on greenfields, the added layer for Lakewood is the fact that these housing units are going to go away. They're not counted in the capacity, but what that means too is that is an area that can't go into where you spread your new housing units into. So it's going to be higher density in the rest of the city. We are in the middle of finishing what is called the equity index map for yourselves and the public to access. Once it's done, we're expecting this to be completed in either late July or into August. But essentially, this is an online interactive tool where anybody who wants to really dive deeper down to the census tract level of equity questions, population, demographics, statistics, why something has a certain rating of its equity index in more detail. People will be able to do that very soon. And we'll probably come back to you with a live demonstration once it's done. The housing needs recommendation, we have to include those by area median income numbers. That's already underway. There should be different sizes of housing and middle housing policies, zoning, regulations, incentives considered and looked at during the 24 process. Existing affordable housing, as I just mentioned to Councilmember Branstetter, is one solution, but it's not the whole answer here in Lakewood. The absence of the anti-displacement policies in the comp plan has to be addressed, and Lakewood certainly is not alone. This is a new high priority issue coming from the state. So many jurisdictions are having to address this for the first time, but that's one of the things that we will be reaching to community-based organizations about over the next year to make sure we get their feedback and input as those policies are developed. More incentives beyond what are currently in the code, which are for senior housing and disabled housing essentially. Looking at allowing higher density housing projects away from the arterials and the major centers. So in those R2, R3, R4 areas in the quote middle of the city, it's going to be areas where densification has to happen as well. And then looking to our infrastructure, and I know that there's lots of conversation and improvement ongoing all the time regarding parks and then pedestrian and cycling access. Those are things that need to be dispersed equitably across the city. Recommendations, I think most of these are of no surprise based on what we just talked about. The other two things I wanted to very quickly go through with you is, again, those two bills that were addressing housing specifically out of this last legislative session. One is having more middle housing, meaning duplex or higher up to sixplex in what have been traditionally single family areas. And also increasing the ability to add accessory dwelling units to parcels. Under 1110, that's the one that says you have to have at least 2 units per single family lot and then 4 units if it's within a quarter mile of a major transit stop. So this map shows you where the outside of that, or the 2 units per lot is the yellow. The orange is the inside of that quarter mile distance. This is looking a little familiar, I think, for you because this is very similar to what you saw related to the potential overlay for emergency housing. But what you see on the left/west side of the city, that's where you would need to be doing your 2 units per lot. The eastern side within the downtown and other parts of the city, you're talking 4 units per lot if it's within a quarter mile walking distance. Alternative 2, instead of doing that, Lakewood could also look at just saying across the board, 75% of all single family lots have to do 2 units per acre, or 4 if it is within a half-mile walking distance. And then the 25% that does not apply to, that's where there's critical areas, that's where there's a risk of displacement that's higher than elsewhere in the city, that's where there's a lack of infrastructure. This is a map that shows you where in Lakewood there are identified critical areas. So if the city were to consider that option 2, which says you apply the 2 units or 4 units per acre on 75% of the lots across the city, and then you start to pull out pieces that are, first of all, critical areas or their buffers, and then you also look at water and sewer capacity, there's actually quite a bit of the city that would not be affected. And for these various reasons that are identified within the bill itself. So we are in the middle right now of starting this analysis to figure out what really the effect of 1110 is going to be within the city of Lakewood, given its lakes, given its creeks, given its other critical areas. The other one that's coming on the horizon is the wildland interface question and whether housing and densification of housing should happen in these areas that are considered wildfire interfaces, the red areas. And obviously it's Fort Steilacoom, but it's also that western part of the residential area, and then down into Woodbrook in particular is affected by that, and then portions of Steilacoom. Water and sewer, I already mentioned. There are limits within that new bill 1110 about street parking, and that's another big issue for the city of Lakewood to consider. The council has had many conversations about on-street, off-street parking requirements, not only citywide, but within each of the sub-area plans. So that conversation is not done. This will be back in front of you again. The city has done its middle housing report, and there's recommendations within it regarding the types of housing that it makes sense to include within Lakewood. I will say that based on the bill, Lakewood already allows all 9 of the types that are identified. So it will be a matter of finessing what's already on the books here in Lakewood to fully comply with House Bill 1110. The accessory dwelling unit bill at 1337 goes even further than 1110 when it talks about how many and what type of combination of accessory dwelling units for all lots that allow for single family homes. And I won't take you down this painful level of detail, but suffice to say that this, coupled with 1110, coupled with 1220, there's going to be a lot of conversation over the next year with the public, with the Planning Commission, and then with yourselves about what type of housing is going to be allowed where, how many units on a particular parcel is going to be allowed. And then I already mentioned the reminder to everyone that for religious organizations, there is a requirement to allow higher density for low-income households if the housing is owned and operated by religious organizations and they keep it affordable for at least 50 years. That's something we'll be incorporating as well. So housing, but there's all these other Growth Management Act priorities which are of equal value under state law, including climate change and resiliency, including wildfire protection. And so how all of these things jive and or can be reconciled is a big question, and that it will also be part of the public dialogue over this coming year. So what we're going to do is start that outreach early. We're going to talk about housing and climate change starting this August with that Lakewood Equity Map getting going live. and also starting working with particular steering committee, working group, advisory board members, stakeholders on the sub areas as well. And then we're also going to be looking at all of the other elements over the next year, but the public outreach focus is going to be those sub areas and then housing citywide and climate change. Just a heads up that next year, it seems far away, but it's not really. We're going to be talking at the Planning Commission formally on May 1st is the tentative date now, with action for the Planning Commission by the end of June. And then the City Council would pick this up right away and potentially looking at action on July 22nd. But obviously you have till the end of the year to take the action. So the council will have plenty of time to go over this, review it, chew it on it, and amend as desired. And that is my presentation, and happy to answer any other questions.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Going back to there was a definition on a religious organization.
Uh-huh.
You know, anybody can go out and become a pastor to do a wedding. You can file a 501c3, say I have a religious belief. What's to keep an unscrupulous developer from saying, I am the Church of what's building now, and using this exemption?
I will go back and look at the language, but I think given the amount of money that is being required of them and the fact that they are required to keep it as affordable for 50 years is going to be somewhat of a chilling effect. But you're right. There may be some who want to try to take advantage of this. I'll see if there's specific definitions and limitations on what a religious organization is defined to be.
It's just, it seems like it's a loophole that could be utilized to convert property that wasn't intended. I have a hypothetical for you too, because it's actually something I'm kind of working on. And it's a what if, going back to your earlier part of your presentation on the requirements for number of housing, number of houses and population, et cetera. And the what if is, what if off of Northgate Road, 100+ acres was carved off of JBLM for an enhanced use lease. It was developed into townhomes, creating over 1,000 units and over 3,000 residents. All within the purview of being on a base where federal building code and regulations are applied. And then it's incorporated into the city of Lakewood. And in Wyoming, they did something similar. On an enhanced use lease on an old air base area. Do those units count in our quota? Have we then provided 1,000 units of housing? And what does the extra 3,000 people do to that equation? Does our equation change because we actually had some of the anticipated population growth?
Off the cuff, the answer is yes, they would count toward the total. And the fact that you've annexed property or incorporated a potential annexation area into the city.
It has zero, right now, see, it has zero population and
Correct.
it is not part of anybody's urban growth area because it's North Fork.
Yeah. I think what you would do is look at the population allocation that is assigned to the city, which is also part of the housing unit and employment allocation process. And separate and apart from the rate of growth, you're just looking at the total numbers. So the 3,000 would fall into your total growth for the number of people. And the new housing units would go in toward your whatever area median income bracket it would fit into. So I think it would be a positive in both senses, meaning you're growing by number of people and by number of units that you're supposed to. What would probably happen though is the next 10-year cycle, they would say, okay, now Lakewood has a population of this and this many housing units and what's happening regionally, here's your new number, Lakewood. So it would help for 10 years.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Boki.
So I'm trying to get in my mind, we've got the comp plan going, but this 2 per Two per,
2 units per
Lot.
lot, yeah,
yes, thank you.
yeah.
What is the timing of that? Does this all, the bill all come due when the comp plan is due? I thought I was in a meeting somewhere where someone said everything's got to get done by, and everything's buttoned up, the comp plan's done by the end of 24 and everything takes effect on July 1st, 2025. Is that correct?
That's not 100% correct if I'm understanding you correctly, because the periodic review is required to be finished by December 31st of 2024. Some of these bills, 1110, 1337, some of the others say you have to have them in effect by July 1st of 2025. So 6 months after you're done with your big review. There's some of these things that actually are saying you don't have to do them until your 5-year check-in with Commerce, which would be 2029. The question for the council is, do you want to be piecemealing it? Do you want to do it all at once? And I can certainly provide more clarity as to when each of the deadlines fall. But very hyper technically, yes, you get done with your periodic review, and then in theory, you can within 6 months adopt a whole new set of things to comply with these bills, or you could be doing it all at the same time.
Okay, we probably need to see that, which
Okay,
ones are
sure.
gonna hit when. I didn't realize there were a variety of
Yeah.
deadlines here.
Yeah, it just confuses the situation even more.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Spears, thank you
Alright.
for the report. I
Thank you.
just wanted to reiterate what you said about the parking on the street. The street there, 59th and Lake Grove, cars parked on that street, I have come very close to turning into that area and someone's flying down Lake Grove. And those cars, there's not much room to move. So
Yeah.
parking on the street is something that we will need to look at
Yeah,
in more depth.
absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the report.
Thank you very much.
We have one more update that we're going to discuss, but before we get, while they are sitting up, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So we are in recess for 5 minutes. Discussion is a flock safety security camera presentation, and for that, we call on Chief Smith. Welcome. Okay.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Deputy Mayor and councilors. This evening, I wanted to talk to you about flock safety camera system for the Lakewood Police Department. Just a little background, in doing research for the department since 2018 to 2023, there's been a steady increase in the number of stolen vehicles in the city. From 2018 to 2023, we've shown a 255% increase in the number of stolen vehicles in the city. However, none of the systems have been upgraded. None of the things that were done to have an impact on this area of crime. Okay. So one of the changes that we're proposing to make is to add flock safety cameras to the city to help our officers know about stolen vehicles and where they are, where they're going. And so what we've done is right now in the motor vehicle thefts month over month are up 45%. And year to date, we show an increase of 22% just in this year alone. So what we wanted to do was to change the way that officers patrol as it relates to stolen vehicles, to identify stolen vehicles when they cross certain checkpoints within the city. So we've identified various zones within the city. Actually, there are 36 of them, covering our entry points in critical areas from other cities like Tacoma, who has shown even a greater increase in the number of stolen vehicles that we have right now. Above you on the screen, you'll see the numbers from 2021. There were, in the first quarter, 129. In 2022, it jumped to 307. In 2023, it jumped to 345. Because stolen vehicles have an impact on every other crime that occurs within the city. Motor vehicle theft is the one crime that has an impact on everything from robbery, fraud, burglary, theft, homicide, weapons crimes. Everyone needs a getaway car. So they're looking for that quick, easy stolen vehicle. And so what we wanted to do was create a web of technology around the city using past patterns. So we went back and looked at the patterns of stolen vehicles, where they were recovered, where they were taken from in years past, and where we can have the greatest impact. One of the areas we wanted to make sure that we covered was our downtown center, our town center. And the reason for that is we consider that what I call is our care zone. Our care zone is where we provide additional services, additional patrol, and we make sure that we're having an impact on crime in those areas. And so by placing a web around, say, our town center, the cameras will let our officers know when a stolen vehicle pass any of those checkpoints, whenever they enter any of those zones, whenever one cross, it lets them know the vehicle type, etc., and gives them more information on that vehicle. The reason we wanted to know about the town center is because when a number of vehicles or one or two vehicles that are stolen enter that zone, we know that something is about to happen, and it gives officers an early warning notice so that they can start to go into those areas. And I know that many of you are wondering, okay, well, why flock safety? Well, flock safety covers a lot of zones for us. it only focuses on the vehicle and not identifying the person or the driver or using any facial recognition technology. What it does is identify the vehicles, whether it is stolen or not. And then it's not going to increase anything for us because the information obtained by Flock Safety only stays in the system for 31 days. If it is not related to a crime or crime hasn't been reported or anything of that nature, it is automatically dumped. So there's no concerns about privacy. There's no concerns about someone who's tracking me or anything like that. If you haven't done anything, there are no reports, there's no investigation, that information is lost and will not be retrieved. This is like a force multiplier for us because it's not just our officers that are out on patrol, it's getting additional information to the officers before a crime has the ability to occur and before things happen. But it's also different technology that can help our detectives as they do follow-up investigations to go back on the day after a report is taken, and they can go back and say, it's the white Mazda that came through the intersection. You simply ask the system, show me all white Mazdas that came through this intersection between this time and this time. And it's going to identify every white Mazda that came through that intersection or every red vehicle that came through so that we can identify any vehicle involved in any particular crime. It's 24/7 coverage, it's real-time alerts. The infrastructure has been tested and proven. I've used Flock Safety before, and it has been very effective as far as identifying and reducing the crime within the city. And I think that it would be a great fit for here in Lakewood. So the way Flock's work is that is self-contained. It is placed on a pole. It relies on solar technology. It does not require any electrical outlets for it to work appropriately. And the best part about it is, while the city can make the initial investment, if other businesses, homeowners associations, and things of that nature decide that they want a Flock Safety camera, they just simply give the city access to their Flock Safety camera, and we're able to easily monitor. And so, as I mentioned before, it does not have any facial recognition technology. There are no real concerns there, and it does not monitor for traffic enforcement. It's just all about the stolen vehicle. Yes.
Is that an area where you can sit at the desk or at a desk and see this happening?
You can. Usually when you're at the desk, you're doing a follow-up investigation. As I mentioned, if you're looking for every red vehicle that came through the intersection, it'll show you every red vehicle. If you type in man on a bicycle, it's going to show you every man on a bicycle that passed through the intersection or that particular zone. And that's designed to help you resolve whatever crime or person that you're looking for or identifying a vehicle. And it gives you certain information. Say you only have a partial license plate. It's going to pull all of that up. It's going to also give you identifying features on a vehicle, such as bumper stickers. If there are 5 on there, it's going to show you the vehicles that have that. And so everything here is about the vehicle technology and identifying.
You know, the reason I asked that question,
Yes.
in Korea, they had this really neat setup where they could sit at the desk and they could see all around the city. That
Yes,
sounded somewhat similar to that.
that's the direction we're going.
Very good.
So we're going, we're going. Honestly, that's the direction I'd like to go. But I recognize that in getting here, a budget is already done and in place. So I just have to lay it out crumb by crumb to deliver us to a place where we need to be so that we can arrive at a place to where as the community is safe, we're getting people back their property in a timely manner, and we're addressing the crime that's occurring within the city. When you have a situation where crime has increased by 255%, and then you have an increase of 22% just in to this point in we've got to take action, and we have to recognize the type of incidences that are happening, and also the key to that being our stolen vehicles.
Thank you. I think you can get some support in that area.
So I'll just go over some of this really quickly. Other departments are already using, I think 37 of them already in the state already have Flock cameras. So in short, what we're asking is that the 36 camera safety plan for the city, the first year will cost $117,000. And that includes everything, include the installation, standalone infrastructure. We've already done the legwork on the first part by identifying the locations, identifying the key zones, identifying the care zones that we want to work on, in addition to major thoroughfares where with entry and exit points to the city that we want to focus on. Our annual cost each year is $108,000. And so, excuse me. And so the whole idea is to definitely have an impact on crime, and certainly start with our stolen vehicle system or issues that we have right now. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. Just a few things. One of the most important aspects of this is the ability to do, as the chief mentioned, follow-up investigations. If we get, say, a detective's working a homicide case and he gets suspect vehicle information, we can, on the back end, we can enter that suspect vehicle information into the system. And now it's looking for that car as well. Not only that, but we can share information with other agencies that are currently using Flock. And we can find out, and we can call them and say, hey, can you enter this vehicle into your system? Now their system's watching for it as well. So this is a network of cameras. The other thing I wanted to mention was officers will have this information real time on their in-car computers. So when that system alerts that a stolen car has just entered the town center, everybody who's on duty right now is getting that information, and everybody can start flowing that direction. So it is a pretty amazing technology that is going to be fantastic for us. It's really going to help with a lot of stuff.
Councilmember Anderson.
So if a business or a homeowners association wanted to add a camera, how much would that cost them, and what's the annual charge? Yeah.
Sorry. The annual charge is $3,000 per year.
Is there an initial charge?
That's it.
That's just, it's like you're leasing it.
Yes.
Yes, Flock has a whole division that will take on that sort of public outreach and start making contact with, if we can point them towards, if this particular homeowners association express some interest, they have a team of people that will go and make contact with them and explain everything to them. It's like the chief said, $3,000 per camera. They can add as many cameras as they would like. And then they just give us access to that data. The information will be of no value to them, but huge value to us.
Councilmember Bell.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. So I was wondering, you kind of talked about, you said that Flock would do the outreach. So my question was, is there a need for additional staff for administrative tasks on this? Is that something that is going to need to happen?
I would say no.
No, the reason that there no additional staff is needed is because the only thing we're doing is flicking on a light switch for the officers. It's like they've been policing in the darkness. All it's doing is providing information to the officers out on patrol in real time. as things occur, as stolen vehicles enter the city, it's alerting those officers that a stolen vehicle is coming down this way, heading westbound on whatever street it is. And for our detectives, it gives them immediate follow-up. If a robbery occurs and they have a vehicle description, they can ask basically whatever it is that they're looking for, so that we can then enter that vehicle in there and track it. The best part about Flock is that once we're in the network, it gives us access to all of the other Flock cameras network throughout the various parts of Washington that will work with us and give us access.
Councilmember Branstetter.
So the system looks for stolen vehicles or vehicles that for some other investigative reason have been entered into the system to be found. I was trying to think if, just use Kent as an example, that if a vehicle is stolen in Kent, and assuming they're a Flock city, and they enter it into their system, but earlier you mentioned if we had a stolen vehicle, we could enter it into our system, but we'd have to call someone else to enter it?
No.
Or is that only for like the investigative
Yes.
investigative one? So we would do that. And I imagine the number one source for stolen vehicles in Lakewood would be Tacoma. Are they in this system yet?
They are not in this system. However, one of the major things that we're doing is we recognize when we receive the report of stolen vehicles in the state of Washington, it breaks it down by department. So we know how many stolen vehicles are roaming around in the city of Tacoma. So a part of what we did was to identify all of the access points coming in from Tacoma so that we can place cameras there. That way, as they come in, we automatically know, our officers know that they're coming this direction or that direction, so that they are aware of what's going on.
And is the Flock system mature enough with enough data that it's been recognized as supportable as an element in terms of building probable cause or reasonable belief to take enforcement actions?
Yeah, so Flock has been around for many years. It started in Atlanta and it grew from there in the southern states all the way out to the West Coast. It works with the systems that are already in place, such as the stolen vehicle system. Whenever a vehicle is entered, it's able to pick that vehicle up. So it's going by already, it's only using systems that are already in place for law enforcement. So rather than an officer sitting there running the computer and looking at a car trying to get a license plate, it's already done it for you. It's doing it every day, every vehicle that passed through that area.
So has it successfully maneuvered challenges in court?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Volkey. You're fine. Chief, you made me forget what I was gonna say. Oh, the $3,000, is that for just the installment and there's no other charges?
That's annual fee.
Annual,
that's it.
Annual fee,
Yes,
the 3,000. Are you open to speaking to homeowners?
yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any more information?
Nothing else.
It sounds good. Appreciate it.
Definitely needed. Thank you guys so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. And so next you can see the items tentatively scheduled for July 17th on our regular council meeting. And following that, we have a report from our city manager, acting city manager, Ms. Kraus.
The first item I have is The Pierce County Regional Council meets the third Thursday of each month at 6 p.m. at the Pierce County Annex. The next meeting is scheduled for July 20th, and members can attend virtually. Mayor Whalen and Councilmember Boki serve as city representatives with voting rights, and no alternative has been appointed. And why this is important is because we have an upcoming meeting where we're not sure if we'll have the second representative attend. So if the city council wishes to appoint an alternative, it will need to follow the city's appointment process, meaning it will need to come back to the city council for approval on July 17th for the alternate, if needed, to attend the July 20th meeting. So I'm looking for direction from the city council if you would like to proceed with appointing an alternate.
And I can,
Councilmember Bo.
and I can speak to that. It's specifically, I was talking to somebody from Puyallup, and that ad hoc committee I'm on, we're taking some votes on this week, I think it's Wednesday or Thursday, we have our meeting. We're gonna vote on, I think, as many as 6 different changes. I'm anticipating that only 2 will pass, and neither of the 2 will amount to any change in the system at all. I proposed 2 things that staff came up with. And I don't think it'll pass. So it's possible we may have some critical votes to take on Thursday, a week from Thursday, whatever date that is, at the PCRC meeting. It's on Zoom. But the guy from Puyallup said, I don't have any alternate down for you. Because remember, I had moved to alternate and Linda was on, and now Linda moved, so I moved back on. But I don't remember appointing an all. I said, well, we'll have to check. And I don't believe Jason's going to be back. If he's going to be back, then we're okay. But I don't think he's back.
So you are an alternate?
Well, I went back on as the regular person with Jason and I after Linda left, but we never appointed an alternate.
So we need an alternate. Any
Yeah.
interest?
Everything's by Zoom still. You just suffered through the meeting from 6 to, the meetings go from about 6 to 7:30 now. Usually the votes are fairly early in the meeting. You don't have to stay for the whole thing if you don't want to. And I don't know that it's absolutely going to be necessary. I mean, it starts at about 6 and goes to about 7:30.
And what day? Is it the same day of the week?
It's Thursday, the next meeting is whatever Thursday.
It's July 20th.
The 20th.
Councilmember Anderson?
Oh, it's way less painful than Puget Sound Regional.
Okay, so I think we have an answer for you, Councilmember Anderson. And you
Okay.
want to stay on, Paul? You can-
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We just needed an alternate to
Okay.
fill in.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the appointment for Councilmember Anderson. Thank you.
If you want
The next items I have is really just upcoming events. We have the Lakewood Farmers Market that runs every Tuesday between 2 and 7 at Fort Steilacoom Park. The next summer concert series is tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. At Fort Steilacoom Park as well. And then we have the big event, Summerfest, on Saturday, July 15th from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. at Fort Steilacoom Park. And then the JBLM Air Show, as mentioned earlier, is on the 15th and the 16th at McCord Field. The groundbreaking ceremony for Fort Steilacoom Park Turf improvement project is scheduled for Thursday, July 27th at 5 p.m. and followed by coffee with the mayor that is also at the Fort Steilacoom Park beginning at 6 p.m. And that concludes my presentation.
Are there any questions, Councilmember Branstetter?
Yes, thank you. On the agenda for next week, there's an item called presentation from Wagon West Mobile Home Park. What's the context of why either they want to give a presentation or we want them to give one?
I don't have an answer for that one, how that came about on the agenda, but I can find out.
Okay. And then are there any special things we should know about the lunch tomorrow?
The lunch tomorrow is still on for the meeting with Mayor de Guzman at 12:30, starting at 12:30 till 1:30. And you should have an appointment on your calendar for that.
Okay, yeah, I am planning to go to that. Okay.
Yes. Yes, Councilmember Anderson will be there and driving. Mayor de Guzman, and then myself, Deputy Mayor Moss, and Councilmember Branstetter will be in attendance.
Very good. You look perplexed.
Didn't it get mentioned to us? I think it's one of those groups that has done where the tenants bought it. I think. Well, no, it's some national group that helps them. Yeah, they've made to talk about the positive changes they've made to the park. It's something like that, but they've made a lot of changes to the park and improvements. And I think that's why they wanted to come. I think they volunteered. It wasn't. Yeah.
In reference to the luncheon, Councilmember Anderson, you'll keep acting city manager informed of Brianna. And so she will keep us on top of it. Thank you so much. Any other questions for this, Ms. Todd? Thank you so much. There's no unfinished business, no new business, so council member comments, and I'll start with Councilmember Bell.
Great, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to thank everybody for their presentations tonight. I thought they were very thorough and answered a lot of questions and also raised some too, but I think they were all great. And I am looking forward to being at Summerfest on Saturday. So thank you.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Yeah, Wagon West was familiar to me because we have a niece that has a kennel called Wagon West Ranch in Packwood. I thought, why the hell? Why is that there? Yeah, I too am going to enjoy Summerfest after I've enjoyed the air show. I have to do a twofer on that day. With respect to the lodging tax, just like to clarify on the capital expenditures, not operations, because you can do tourism, marketing, special events. The actual wording of the law is supporting the operations and capital expenditures of tourism-related facilities owned or operated by a municipality or a public facilities district. It's very clear. And last year, Pierce County attempted, the Lodging Tax Committee attempted to allocate money to a capital expenditure that would go to a nonprofit. And the prosecutor's office concurred that that couldn't be done. So you can have a nonprofit you can support the operations of facilities owned or operated by nonprofits, but you can't give them capital money. And I think it's pretty clear. So we have to be careful for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Branstetter.
I think that I'm looking forward to Summerfest, and I'm hoping that the traffic circle is open so I can get there. It looked like 90% ready to allow cars to go through. They're just not doing that yet. So we'll see how that goes. And I think it'll be, the lineup of things that are going on there looks, both impressive, but also having evolved with new things, as has been the case each year, where there's been something old, something new, and something for everyone to be able to go and do that. And at Summerfest, the Sister Cities Association is putting on the entertainment that comprises the international festival stage at the pavilion. And they've got 14 groups representing different cultures and countries to be able to go on. So we'll look to be able to go and do that. That's all I have.
Councilmember Boki.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Moss. We had the SHAPE meeting executive board meeting last week. A presentation by the manager, the SHAPE manager, and adopting the 2024 SHAPE work plan. We also had a presentation by Marty Kustra on the Black Home Initiative. I think we'll probably be asked to participate, although it's a kind of it was described as a North Pierce County, South King County, because they didn't want it to be Seattle centric. So I was like, well, I think that's interesting that we're not being included in this, but yet I listened to a presentation to the county council, and the woman who presented in that case works right down the street here. So I'm hopefully we'll be included in that. They really are trying to get a lot of people to the table to try to figure how they're going to do this. Because one of my questions was, well, I mean, there's always people out there that'll write a mortgage, right, of some sort to people who want a house. And that's kind of how we got the mortgage crisis of 08, because some of these mortgages were just horrible. And my question was, well, how do you how are you going to make sure that these folks are going to get access to mortgages that you and I can get, right? The 30-year fixed with no change, various things like that, pretty plain vanilla. And he had a pretty good answer to. I mean, they're working at it. It's not easy. So, but it's an interesting thing. And SHAPE has been asked to sign on. The county council has already signed on. I don't know what Tacoma's done. I have a feeling we'll probably be asked at some point in time. And then we looked at the attainable graphics. And so it's all on here. I wanted to forward you guys this, and maybe I can figure that out. But it really is on the SHAPE website. And if you go through and you saw the Lakewood affordable graphics, and that's how we got that, because SHAPE put that all together for like every city in the area. So about attainable, what you saw tonight for us, like if you make this much money at this much AMI, what can you afford? And it's interesting. So anyway, so it was a good meeting. We'll see where it all goes. I mentioned that transportation thing. We're going to meet on Wednesday or Thursday, probably Wednesday, via Zoom to discuss to vote on these things. I'm not expecting any major changes to come out of this committee. Lakewood does okay. So it's not, we're not really the ones that have been losing. There are some definite winners in the current process of doling out transportation dollars. What became clear to me is that there's problems with our system, and it really is, there are less and less applicants over the years. I mean, and the staff said, well, umpteen years ago, there were 40-something applications, and there were, 20 cities or something, or 18 cities. And last time we did it, there was, 12 cities and 24 applications. I mean, it was really, and of course, the University Place got 4 of them or something, right? So, but there seems to be a reluctance from the city of Tacoma to change the system. And I think we're ambivalent really when in tying with the city manager, because we do okay under the current system, not great, but okay. So we'll see what happens, but I'll know more when we come back here next week. With that, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I am looking forward to Summerfest because this year I will actually be able to enjoy it. LMCC is not going to have a booth.
Oh,
Last year I spent 11 hours in that booth and that was enough for me. I was too tired to watch the festivities at the end of the evening. So this year I will be able to enjoy Summerfest. So I'm looking forward to that. On Thursday, I will be attending the chamber luncheon. Chief Smith is going to be the guest speaker. And National Night Out, we all got the email. We can respond if we choose to have a escort. So make sure you respond to the email from city. Other than that, is there anything for the good of the order? Seeing none, I declare the meeting closed. We adjourned.